This guy, I won't go over this, but Richard Mueller from my alma mater at Berkeley was one of the main scientists who was a climate change skeptic. He just came out and said, actually, it's true, it's all real, and it is human caused. Next slide. Here's Florida, right? So just watch the bottom half of the picture, right? You see the lake, the Everglades. Okay, now I wave my magic wand and raise sea level 3 meters. Slide. Whoops. What Miami? There's no Miami. There's no Fort Lauderdale. There's no southern Florida. Miami would be a little island down here on the bottom of the edge over here, if you could build tall enough walls around it. Where are those people going to go? 20% of the people in the world live within 10 feet of sea level, 3 meters of sea level. Where are they going to go? They're going to go marching uphill, right? You don't think that's going to generate wars, upheavals, strife? This is serious stuff. And my generation has blown it. Sorry, but this is on your table now. Next slide. Now, this is even worse. This is the end of the scary part. Scientist Anderson, his name is, from Harvard. This came out last week showing that there might be a link between climate change and global warming and ozone depletion. Because bigger, more powerful storms are pumping moisture up into the lower stratosphere, which is normally dry. When it does that, it's pumping up the residue of all the old refrigerants, the CFCs that were attacking the ozone layer, pumping it up into the stratosphere where it can attack the ozone again, but not over the Arctic and the Antarctic, over the populated areas of the world like Trinidad and Tobago. This looks like it's fairly sound science, and this brings a whole new layer to the whole issue of climate change. Next slide. Okay. Good news time. There is good news. There's lots of good news. We don't hear it in Trinidad. I've been listening to people today talk about solutions and grasping for solutions. There's solutions to almost every single environmental issue we have now. They're available now, they're practical now, they're proven now, and they're profitable almost every time. So this thing of either we protect the environment or have healthy economies is a lie. It probably has always been a lie, but it is certainly a lie right now. There's a ton of opportunities. Go ahead, next slide. Again. Markets are changing all over the world. Companies are going green. Green procurement guidelines. Sustainable supply chain requirements are taking off throughout the whole corporate world. The green economy is not something that's out there that might happen in Trinidad and Tobago someday. It is here now. Not so much in TNT, but it's all over the world. Slide. You might, there's a concentrating solar panel. Anybody recognize any of those companies? Okay, every one of them has corporate sustainability and green supply chain requirements built into their corporate charters now today. 2/3 of the biggest, most profitable companies in the world have said, we're going green, we're going sustainable, and it goes all the way down through our supply chain. So if you got a little business in Trinidad and you want to partner with Sony, you better be ISO 14000 certified, or they're not going to do business with you. The best example of this, see Nike, Puma, and Adidas? Last October, Greenpeace has been gunning for Nike for years because of their bad track record on employment and child labor, right? They find a Nike contractor in China dumping toxic waste in the Perfume River. And it's going in the river and poisoning villages, and they got pictures of kids with blood flowing out of their nose. Public relations disaster for a company like Nike that's already challenged and that is selling health, right? Healthy, just do it. Bloody nose, just do it. Yeah. Sick kid, just do it. You go jog while your kid's in the hospital. Yeah, great. Nike, and it turned out Adidas is using the same company. As a contractor now, Nike and Adidas both said, well, we don't use them for wet processes, so that waste wasn't ours. But damage is done politically and in terms of public relations. 2 weeks later, Nike says, we going green and non-toxic. 2 weeks after that, Adidas says the same thing. 3 weeks after that, Puma says the same thing. So if you're in business, you want to work in a big company, and you don't pay attention to environment and what your supply chain might be doing out there somewhere, and what your subcontractors might be doing, you ain't getting that job. So as young people, ignore this at your peril, right? Next slide. I'm not going to read all this, but going green, these companies, I'd like to believe that these companies and our sponsors, and I do believe it, that they do genuinely care about the environment. But we know they care about profits, and they found that going green is profitable for a lot of reasons. Next slide. Right? It's profitable to be green. If you're not going green, you are falling behind in the global marketplace. Bad. Next slide. And why? Because it's efficiency. An environmental person and a business person can argue about plenty of things, right? But they're not going to argue about efficiency. Look at the, I counted, there's about 120 light bulbs on in this building right now, right? In this room, sorry. Oh, I forgot the exit lights. So there's probably more than 120. Now, if this hotel could get the same delivery of service to us, which is light, but with half as many light bulbs, they make money, Tech burns less natural gas, and the planet wins, right? There's lots of opportunities out there, especially for innovative, smart people who don't just accept the status quo. This is where the young, nimble, agile mind that's sitting out here comes in. Where you question things, say, wait, do we really need all these lights on? How about if we shrink the size of the room? How about if we put in some of those solar tubes and run natural light in? That way you'd be half as likely to fall asleep in the afternoon too, right? Better experience, better health, and better for the environment. Next slide. There's a beautiful turtle. Next slide. Next slide again, please. All right, so what can you do? Slide, please. First, I would suggest you read the root books that the whole movement comes out of. Things like Walden and Sand County Almanac, Natural Capitalism, Silent Spring. It's good. You know, they say you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. The environmental movement globally has a long, beautiful tradition, and I think you should, if you haven't, try to get a little bit informed about that. Next slide. So, teachers, leaders, and heroes. Next slide, please. So we have leaders like John F. Kennedy. Everybody knows. They're very high profile. They're important. They have a huge impact on the world, right? Next slide. Here's a quote from Gandhi. You don't need to read it, I'll tell you. A woman comes up to Gandhi and says, Gandhiji, I want you to help me get my child to stop eating sugar. He says, come back in 3 days. She comes back in 3 days. He tells the child, stop eating sugar. She asks him, why'd you make me wait 3 days for that? He said, because I had to stop eating sugar myself first. Right? So it's about practice what you preach. So my point here is, you don't have to be on TV to be a leader. You're a leader already because you're sitting in this room on a Saturday. You're already there, right? Next slide. I have been lucky in my life to have great teachers. Alan Miller was one of my teachers at Berkeley, and he took on the federal government and got them to stop using Agent Orange, or it was a defoliant, a chemical they used in Vietnam, and it poisoned a lot of men and still causing health problems in Vietnam to this day. He took on the federal government and won. Single-handedly, he took on the U.S. government and beat him. Jan Newton, the same Agent Orange was being used in my lifetime on forests in America because it would kill the trees they didn't want and help the timber companies grow the trees they did want. Problem is miscarriages, birth defects, mainly women. Jan Newton was a lawyer who took on a couple of ladies in Oregon as a client, sued the federal government, beat them, and that's where the EPA, part of where the EPA came out of, which is where also is the grandfather of your own EMA here. So you don't believe that one person can make a difference, you're not paying attention. Helen Caldecott is a great example of that. If you don't, I'll leave you to investigate her. But any woman in the room who cares passionately about environment and a better future, find out who Helen Caldecott is. Next slide. Here's Nelson Mandela, so another very high-profile guy we all think of as a hero, right? So we have teachers, we have heroes, we have leaders. Next slide, please. This is Julia Butterfly Hill. I know her. She spent 738 days in a tree she called Luna. She said, "You're not cutting this tree down." She's not saying anything about all the other trees. Well, she was, but she then wrote a book about it called The Legacy of Luna, which is a great book. As soon as she came down from the tree, the timber company said she just did that to make money on her book, right? But then she said, actually, when I signed the book contract, I already donated all my proceeds to charity. They went very quiet very fast as they realized they were messing with the wrong girl when she said that. Now, this is high-profile, dramatic heroism, eco-heroes, right? Next slide. Here's someone you never heard of. She lives in, Orellana province in Ecuador. Grandmother, she's not literate, she doesn't speak Spanish. She speaks a Native American dialect. Chevron took over Texaco Holdings in the Ecuadorian Amazon, one of the worst pollution problems in the world. She took on Chevron single-handedly and beat them and won a lawsuit against Chevron for $9.5 billion US dollars. Right? So don't get discouraged. There are plenty of examples of victory out there. Next slide, please. And again. So what can you do? Number one, you got to live green if you're going to talk green, right? I'll show you an example here. And it pays to do this. That's my little bottle here. I drink a lot of water. 20 TT. I did the math. This saves me 7 TT a day, 6 days a week. It works out to over 2,000 TT a year that this bottle pays me to carry it around. I got it at a Green Lifestyles show 2 years ago. Here's how stupid I am. I bought one, but I go through about 2 or 3 of these a day, right? I had to wait a year for my wife to buy me the second one. This paper here, this is FSC, Forest Stewardship Certified paper. It works better than the stuff you buy at PriceSmart. It's better quality, holds the ink better, doesn't jam in your printer as much, costs less than the PriceSmart paper, and it's certified sustainable paper, and it's available right up the street here in Port of Spain, right? So there's little things you can do in your life that not only are greener, but actually pay you to do it. I like getting paid to be green. You can build green. You can speak. You can be a loudmouth and a pest. You can write letters to the editor. You can write articles. You can write papers. You can recycle. There's a lot you can do. You can band together and lobby. Politics is what I deal with a lot, and it's frustrating. But you got to keep on them. You got to keep on them. Not everybody. I'm not telling you what works for you might not work for him. We each got to find our place in this. But there's plenty of room for everybody, right? And especially with a group of young people, I think it's very important to be disobedient. Next slide, please. Here's one of my heroes, Howard Zinn. He wrote the People's History of the United States. He says, civil disobedience is not our problem. Our problem is civil obedience. Our problem is that people are obedient all over the world in the face of poverty and starvation and stupidity and war and cruelty and climate change and biodiversity destruction, right? There is nothing wrong with some appropriate nonviolent disobedience. And young people throughout history have been change agents by being uppity troublemakers. I was one. I still try to be whenever possible and appropriate. Next slide, please. Here's what Gandhi said. Non-cooperation with evil is as much of a duty as cooperating with good. Right? So I think our minister who was here this morning is a great example. Young person, junior minister, now in Parliament, now in new Ministry of Environment, which I have high hopes for, right? She was a smelter activist. She was down there with her placard saying no to the government. No, you're not building this smelter on my watch. And look where she is now. So there's a success story in this room, right? Next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to finish with this. I'm an undergraduate at Berkeley, and we had to take this course called Introduction to Conservation of Natural Resources. You go in this huge lecture hall, like 3 times this size, every Tuesday and Thursday for 90 minutes. And the world's leading environmental scientists would come through every week. Paul Ehrlich talking about population problems. Carolyn Merchant talking about gender and women's issues and environment. Amory Lovin's talking about the future of energy, and John Holderan talking about energy wars and how American policy and energy is going to warm the planet and melt the ice caps. This is in 1982, right? And after 6 months of sitting in those lecture halls, you wanted to walk out, go up to the balcony at the top of life sciences and hurl yourself off, right? It was so depressing.
So my question to you is, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that you don't eat anything out of Trinidad because of pesticides or pollution in the Gulf of Paria, etc. So where exactly are you getting your food? And second of all, how are you verifying that the same exact thing is not happening to the food from wherever you're getting it?
Well, obviously I'm eating quite well. My wife's from Chaguanas. She makes awesome roti. I eat great, okay?
Right.
I do eat stuff from Trinidad. I'm just saying, this whole thing of, hey, let's eat the local stuff, that's uninformed consumerism is what my point. I guess I didn't phrase it very well. That's uninformed consumerism. You got to ask, where did that come from? What's in it? And the thing is, if you do ask, if everybody starts to ask those uncomfortable questions of the people they're buying from, a certain percentage of those people are going to start to realize, hey, maybe my business practices need to shift a little bit. I mean, you can check labels. And nowadays, I'm really happy when I see the Salinas, California label on things, which is where a lot of the produce served here today was probably from. Although even there, it's not as well regulated and frequently tested as it should be. At least I know it's got some FDA testing has probably been applied to it. Whereas here, our produce is effectively completely unmonitored.
I think, though, the point I was getting to earlier when I did talk about eating local is that we have the power as local consumers to demand from our local farmers that we don't want pesticides or we don't want fertilizers. But we don't have that power on an international scale with huge corporations, but we have that power here. That was kind of where I was getting at when I said we have power here and we can use it on that forum.
No, that's a great point. And when I go to the store in Northern California, I walk in now and the organics, it used to be there's like conventional produce and this little piece called organics. Now in a lot of the stores, the conventionals are this big and the organics are that big, and the price for the organics is the same as the conventionals, but the quality, the tomatoes are red. When did tomatoes turn white? Did I miss the memo? Tomatoes are supposed to be red, aren't they? A lot of times, that's another thing, is the green products, whether it's clothes, cleaning supplies, light bulbs, whatever it is, are trying to pound their way into established markets. So they tend to have very high quality. So not only, maybe you pay a little premium, but is it more expensive to buy that light bulb if it lasts 10 times as long as the other one, but only costs 7 times as much? Right? So it's about informed consumerism. But your point is great, and the government clearly is trying to push agriculture in Trinidad and Tobago right now, and I think it's the perfect time, I think you're exactly right, to demand, hey, we don't want just any old agriculture, we want quality.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This is just a comment on what you were talking about with Cropper Foundation on the value in ecosystem services. If anyone wants to get information, this is just like a plug for the Crabbe Foundation. We're doing this project led by Professor Agard called ProEcoServe, which is the Project for Ecosystem Services. And what that basically is looking at the value of ecosystems and how much they are worth in terms of national accounts. So you have Bengal's GDP, but you also have your economic value of your existing ecosystem. So if anybody wants to get information on that, you could look us up at the Crabbe Foundation. And a colleague of mine did a very quick calculation a couple of weeks ago, and the northeastern half of the northern range is worth about 700 million US, 700 million US per year in terms of flood control. And that's just one ecosystem service. So that's just an example of the type of comparisons we could do when we actually value the ecosystem. So if you all want to know some more, just check us out and give us a call.
Sorry, I'm trying to show a slide that you guys could look at. Oh, and thank you again to Stephen Broadridge. One more slide. Keep going. I'll tell you when to stop. There. Oh, shoot. Natural capitalism. I will just leave that up there. I'll give you this information, but here's some books on these subjects. Ecology, Commerce, Natural Capitalism, and Cradle to Cradle. That talk about payment for ecosystem services, a different way to rebuild our economies, all profitable and all good for the environment. Well, thank you very much, everybody. And please don't hesitate to contact me if I can help you with research or information or anything else. Thank you.